Grant Davenport was the living example of how money could shape a person from birth. The only son of a wealthy family in Atlanta, he grew up surrounded by everything money could buy: state-of-the-art toys, exclusive schools, and vacations in the most luxurious destinations in the world. Yet, despite all the privilege, his childhood was far from ideal. His father, Thomas Davenport, was a financial mogul, obsessed with work and absent from his son's life. His mother, Eleanor, though more present, was rigid and cold, more concerned with appearances than with the boy's feelings. Grant learned early on that, in that house, affection was conditional, a currency offered only when convenient. He was just a child when he realized his opinion carried little weight. During an important dinner at the family mansion, he tried to share something trivial, but was silenced by his mother's piercing gaze, as she continued the conversation as if he weren't there. That's how it worked. He was seen, but not heard. That night, Grant began to understand that, in the world of the wealthy, respect was reserved for those who had something to offer: power, status, or money. At 13, he was sent to St. James School, an exclusive boarding school in North Carolina. There, he met other teenagers from millionaire families, all competing for the attention and approval of anyone who mattered. It was an environment where connections outweighed friendships, and Grant quickly realized that survival required learning how to play the game. He began observing the weaknesses and insecurities of others, manipulating situations to his advantage. At the same time, he developed a growing disdain for those he considered weak or incapable of achieving success. Despite his calculated behavior, there were moments when Grant felt the weight of loneliness. Vacations were particularly difficult. While his classmates went home to spend time with their families, he returned to an empty mansion, inhabited only by staff who treated him like a little king, but could never fill the emotional void. He spent nights staring out the window, imagining what it might be like to live in a house where people truly cared for one another. But those thoughts didn't last long. Grant buried them quickly, convincing himself that emotions were a weakness he couldn't afford. At 18, Grant was accepted into the Wharton School, one of the most prestigious business schools in the world. There, he honed his skills of manipulation and persuasion. His professors described him as brilliant but distant, while his peers both admired and feared him. Grant didn't form friendships. He built temporary alliances with people he believed could be useful in the future. By the time he graduated, he had a clear plan. He wouldn't just inherit the family fortune, he would architect his own empire. Back in Atlanta, he took a role in his father's company, but quickly began charting his own course. He implemented drastic changes, often unpopular, but consistently profitable. He cut costs ruthlessly, restructured entire departments, and took risks others deemed reckless. Within a few years, he tripled the family portfolio's value and gained media attention as one of the country's most promising young entrepreneurs. By the time he was 30, Grant was a successful man with a fortune rivaling his father's. He purchased a mansion on the outskirts of Atlanta, a monument to his ego and ambition. The property was modern, with glass walls offering stunning views, immaculate gardens, and an Olympic-sized pool. To the outside world, Grant seemed to have it all: money, power, and influence. But behind the facade was an empty man, incapable of forming genuine connections. Grant avoided discussing his childhood or his relationship with his parents. His father, now in poor health, was more removed from the business, and Grant rarely visited him. He justified it by claiming he was too busy, but the truth was he couldn't face the man he had, in many ways, become. His mother, though still alive, seemed more concerned with maintaining appearances than fostering any real bond with her son. In love, Grant was no different. Over the years, he had a few relationships, none of which lasted. The women he dated were as ambitious as he was, but eventually, they all became mere distractions. He viewed them as temporary trophies, something to display at events, but never true partners. For Grant, money was the answer to everything. He believed that as long as he maintained financial control, no one could hurt him. In his mind, the world was a game, and he was the most skilled player. But that was about to change. One night, at a charity event held at a luxurious Atlanta hotel, he would meet someone who would challenge everything he believed. Grant Davenport was used to being the center of attention. But that night, at Atlanta's luxurious Ritz-Carlton Hotel, something different caught his eye. The charity event, organized by the city's elite, was as expected: tycoons, philanthropists, and socialites discussing the best ways to flaunt their wealth while pretending to care. Grant wandered through the hall, greeting familiar faces and handing out prepackaged smiles, when he saw her for the first time: Olivia. She wasn't like the women who typically attended these events. While most of the guests flaunted sparkling dresses and jewelry competing with the decor, Olivia was elegantly simple in a black dress that fit her with understated grace. Her hair, styled in long braids, fell over her shoulders, and her eyes conveyed an intriguing mix of confidence and calm. She was chatting animatedly with a small group of people, but seemed immune to the superficiality that permeated the room. Grant found himself inexplicably drawn to her. He waited for the right moment to approach. When he finally did, he didn't receive the usual deference he was accustomed to. Olivia greeted him with a polite smile, but her eyes held steady, disarming the aura of superiority he carried. "You must be Grant Davenport," she said, without a hint of adulation in her voice. "I've heard of you. One of Atlanta's biggest investors, right?" Grant smiled, satisfied. "And I hope only good things." "Not always," Olivia replied without hesitation. The group around them chuckled softly, but Grant felt the sting. He was used to compliments, not blunt responses like that. "And you, what do you do?" he asked, attempting to regain control of the conversation. "I'm a literature teacher at a public school," she said simply, but with a tone that seemed to carry an implicit challenge. "And tonight, I'm here representing a reading project for children in underserved communities. A noble cause," Grant responded, choosing his words carefully to impress her. But Olivia didn't seem impressed. "More necessary than noble," she corrected. "After all, the children we serve don't have the same opportunities you or I had." Grant remained silent for a moment. Her self-assurance challenged him, and he wasn't sure if he was irritated or fascinated. He decided it was the latter. Throughout the evening, he found himself drawn closer to Olivia. They discussed the education system, social inequalities, and even literature, a subject Grant admitted he knew little about but listened to with interest. Olivia's passion radiated through every word, and for the first time in years, he felt he was speaking to someone who wasn't trying to impress or please him. It was a new, almost unsettling experience. By the end of the event, Grant couldn't help himself. He asked for her contact information, something he rarely did because he preferred being pursued rather than pursuing. Olivia hesitated for a moment, but handed him a card with her name and number. He noticed that, while she allowed this small gesture, she wasn't the least bit dazzled by his fame or fortune. That only piqued his curiosity further. Over the following week, Grant couldn't get her out of his mind. He replayed their conversation, recalling how she challenged him without being rude, how she seemed so secure in a world where even the most powerful fought to maintain appearances. Finally, he decided to call. Olivia answered, surprised, but not overly emotional. They talked for a few minutes, and Grant felt that same strange mix of nervousness and excitement. At the end of the call, he asked her to dinner. They met at a cozy restaurant called The Optimist, far removed from the glamour Grant was used to. It was her choice, and he accepted without complaint. The dinner was a revelation. Olivia wasn't afraid to disagree with him, and her opinions were always well-reasoned. She spoke about her family, especially her mother, who was in a wheelchair, and how they had always supported one another. Grant listened intently, something he rarely did with anyone. Over the months, their relationship evolved. Olivia continued living her simple life, while Grant tried to balance his luxurious world with hers. He brought her to events where she always stole the show with her intelligence and natural charm. In return, she introduced him to a world he had never experienced, one of ordinary people with real problems and simple dreams. Despite their differences, they seemed to find balance. But there was one thing Grant couldn't fully grasp. The deep connection between Olivia and her mother. Whenever Olivia spoke about the woman who raised her, her eyes sparkled in a way he couldn't decipher. He knew that, sooner or later, he would have to meet her, and when that day came, everything in his life would change forever. Grant Davenport was not a man who usually cared about others' impressions. However, when the time came to invite Olivia and her mother to spend a few days at his mansion, he found himself unusually concerned with the details. The house, impeccable and monumental, was a demonstration of power and wealth, but for the first time, he wondered if it might seem too ostentatious to a woman like Olivia, who valued simplicity and genuine human connection. The invitation was extended during a casual dinner while Olivia animatedly discussed a new initiative she had implemented at the school where she worked. Grant waited for the right moment and, with the casual tone that masked his apprehension, suggested that she and her mother, Margaret, spend the weekend at the mansion. It would be nice to get to know her better, he said, referring to Olivia's mother, and I'm sure you both will love the place. It's spacious, quiet, perfect for relaxing. Olivia hesitated for a moment. My mother doesn't go out much anymore. Ever since she started using a wheelchair, things have become more complicated. My house is completely accessible, Grant assured her, surprising even himself with the quick response. He had made sure there were no barriers on the property, but he knew the real challenge would be earning the trust of Margaret, a woman who, according to Olivia, was protective and wary when it came to her daughter. After some persistence and assurances that everything was prepared, Olivia agreed and the weekend was scheduled. On the day of their arrival, Grant made an effort to organize every detail. The kitchen was instructed to prepare light and healthy dishes, and he personally oversaw the arrangement of the rooms. He ensured that Margaret's room was on the ground floor, with easy access to the garden. When Olivia's car pulled up to the mansion, Grant was waiting, trying to hide his anxiety. Olivia stepped out first, her warm smile easing some of his tension. Shortly after, Margaret appeared, a woman with a firm gaze and dignified posture, even in her wheelchair. Her gray hair was tied in an elegant bun, and she wore a simple but tasteful blouse that reflected her practical personality. "Welcome," said Grant, slightly bowing in a respectful gesture as he greeted Margaret. "It's a pleasure to have you here." Margaret returned his words with a reserved smile. "Thank you, Mr. Davenport. Olivia has spoken a lot about you. I hope it's been positive," he replied with a touch of humor, trying to break the ice. Margaret merely raised an eyebrow, making it clear she was still assessing him. Inside the house, Margaret seemed impressed but said little. Olivia, on the other hand, explored every corner with curiosity and enthusiasm, while Grant made a point of showcasing the most beautiful aspects of the property. When they reached the garden, Margaret finally broke her silence. "You have a beautiful place here," she said, looking around. "But beauty isn't everything, is it?" Grant caught the subtext, but remained unfazed. "I completely agree. Beauty is just part of the equation. What matters is what we do with what we have." Margaret stared at him for a moment before replying. "Pretty words. Let's see if you really believe them." The first few days passed smoothly, but Grant felt Margaret's presence as a constant reminder that he needed to prove something. Olivia was clearly at ease, dividing her time between light-hearted conversations with Grant and moments of closeness with her mother. Margaret, however, remained reserved, observing every gesture and word of Grant's as if waiting for him to slip up. During one lunch, as they talked about their childhoods, Margaret made a remark that left Grant uncomfortable. "It's curious how you and Olivia come from such different worlds, yet found something in common." "That's rare." Grant knew this wasn't just an innocent comment. It was a challenge, a reminder that he needed to prove he was worthy of Olivia. Not just because of his status or wealth, but because of who he truly was. And while he did his best to please, Margaret seemed determined to keep him under constant scrutiny. That evening, while Olivia was busy in the kitchen preparing a dessert she wanted to share, Grant and Margaret were left alone in the living room. The silence between them was palpable until Margaret spoke. "You know, Mr. Davenport, wealth can open many doors, but it can also close others." Grant frowned, confused. "What do you mean by that?" I mean that sometimes people get so lost in what they have that they forget who they are. Olivia is someone who knows exactly who she is and won't change for you or anyone else. Grant felt the weight of her words. Margaret wasn't just talking about Olivia, she was challenging him to show he was more than a wealthy and successful man. He knew earning her trust wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that if he truly wanted to be part of Olivia's life, he would have to prove himself. The weekend was just beginning. But Grant could already sense that these days wouldn't just be a test. They would be a turning point in his relationship with Olivia and, perhaps, in his own life. The initial days at Grant Davenport's mansion were marked by a subdued yet controlled tension. Olivia seemed captivated by the environment, while her mother, Margaret, remained reserved, limiting herself to polite smiles and brief comments. However, this apparent calm concealed a brewing storm. On a Monday afternoon, Olivia had to leave to handle some professional matters. Before departing, she ensured that Margaret would be fine and asked Grant to look after her. He nodded with a false, reassuring smile, but as soon as Olivia left, his expression changed. A trace of impatience crossed his face. He disliked interruptions in his routine, and to him, Margaret represented exactly that, an inconvenience. Margaret was in the garden, enjoying the fresh breeze and luxurious view. When Grant approached with purposeful steps, he found her admiring the carefully cultivated flowers, and his presence did not go unnoticed. "Enjoying other people's work?" he asked, with the tone bordering on disdain. Margaret turned slowly in her wheelchair, raising her gaze to meet his. "Yes, it's beautiful work. Whoever cares for this garden has very skilled hands." Grant gave a dry smile. "The best professionals, of course. Those of us with resources can afford such luxuries." Margaret didn't respond immediately. Her eyes locked onto his, evaluating him with a calmness that seemed to unsettle him. "Lucky you. Having so many people to ensure everything is perfect for you," she finally said. Grant ignored the veiled provocation. "If you need anything, just ask. The house has many services, but I imagine adapting can sometimes be a challenge." He let the sentence hang, his tone insinuating more than it stated outright. Margaret remained unfazed. "It's an impressive house, but I manage just fine. I always have." That night, Grant decided it would be interesting to test Margaret's patience. At dinner, while Olivia had yet to return, he insisted on serving dishes he knew she couldn't eat. He set the table at a height slightly above the comfortable reach for her wheelchair, and upon noticing her difficulty, offered help with a smile that masked malicious intent. "It's a bit more complicated, isn't it?" he commented, while pretending to adjust the height of his own chair. "But I'm sure you'll manage. You seem so independent." Margaret met his gaze, her expression unchanged. "Independence is a state of mind, Mr. Davenport. It doesn't depend on chairs or tables." The provocations continued in the days that followed. Grant made a point of pointing out small details, always subtly but loaded with cruel intent. He complained about spaces occupied by her wheelchair, lamented the difficulty of adaptations in a tone of regret, and repeatedly reminded her of how much his life was made easier by the services and resources at his disposal. At one point, when Margaret asked to be taken to the library, Grant responded with feigned sympathy. "Of course, but you might not enjoy it as much. Most of the books are heavy and hard to handle." Margaret didn't hesitate to retort. "I'm sure I can find something I like. After all, reading is about content, not format." Despite his constant attempts to unsettle her, Margaret remained calm. Each disguised insult was met with a direct yet polite response that left Grant frustrated. He had expected to find a fragile woman, unable to push back. But what he encountered was a silent yet relentless adversary. When Olivia finally returned from her commitments, Grant transformed into the perfect host, attentive and caring. Margaret, however, observed everything with a clarity he underestimated. She knew exactly what was happening and made a point not to say anything to her daughter, waiting for the right moment to act. On the last day of the visit, Grant played one final card. While Olivia was in the shower, he approached Margaret and said in a low, cutting tone, "You think you can stand against me, but don't forget, this is my world. You're just a guest." Margaret smiled. Something he didn't expect. And you think you understand everything about the world, don't you? Maybe it's time you learn things aren't as simple as you believe. The tension in the air was almost palpable. Grant stepped back and settled by Margaret's unshakable confidence. What he didn't know was that his words had sealed his fate. Margaret already had what she needed to turn the tables, and while Grant celebrated his supposed superiority, she patiently waited for the moment to reveal the truth. That morning, the mansion was steeped in tension. Grant, still savoring his supposed dominance, walked through the halls with an air of confidence. Olivia, unconcerned, believed her mother's stay was going smoothly. Margaret, however, knew the time to act had come. During breakfast, as Olivia was preparing to leave, Margaret asked for a moment alone with Grant. Her daughter, unsuspecting, smiled and left them in the living room. Grant leaned against one of the leather armchairs, crossing his arms, as if ready to hear something he deemed insignificant. Margaret calmly turned her wheelchair to face him directly. Her gaze carried something Grant couldn't fully identify, a mix of determination and something that seemed almost like compassion. "Mr. Davenport," Margaret began, her voice firm, "think it's time we put all the cards on the table. You've tried hard to make me feel small in this house. You've tried to belittle me, humiliate me, and remind me at every step how superior you think you are. But the truth, dear sir, is that you're wrong about a lot of things." Grant raised an eyebrow, maintaining his arrogant posture. "Oh, really? And what exactly don't I know, Margaret?" She took a deep breath, as if preparing to release a burden she had carried for years. "You're right in saying this is your house, your world. But what you don't know is that my story and yours are intertwined in ways you can't imagine." Grant laughed mockingly. "What do you mean by that? Do you think some secret from the past will change anything now?" Margaret remained calm, ignoring the sarcasm. "I knew your father, Grant, many years ago. He and I had a relationship before you were even born. A relationship that left marks." Grant's smile faded for a moment, replaced by an expression of restrained curiosity. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No, it's not a joke," Margaret replied firmly. "It's the truth. Your father and I were lovers. For a brief time, we thought about building a life together, but he chose another path. He preferred the safety of the Davenport fortune and name." Grant straightened up, the tension now evident in his posture. "What are you trying to say?" Margaret gave a faint smile, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "I'm saying that I'm your mother, Grant. Your father never knew, but I've always known. And now, so do you." The ensuing silence was deafening. Grant blinked a few times, as if trying to process what he had just heard. The usual confidence in his expression dissolved, replaced by a mix of shock and disbelief. "That's impossible," he stammered. "You're lying." "I'm not," Margaret stated firmly. "If you need proof, it exists. But I don't think you need it. Deep down, I think you know I'm telling the truth." "Your eyes, Grant. You have your father's eyes." Grant stood abruptly, walking to the window. He gazed at the vast garden, but his thoughts were far from there. Margaret waited patiently, allowing him to absorb the information. Finally, he turned, his expression a mixture of anger and confusion. "Why didn't you say anything before? Why wait until now?" Margaret leaned slightly forward. "Because I knew you weren't ready to hear it, and because I needed you to understand something important. Your behavior, your arrogance, all of it comes from a distorted view of who you are. You think power lies in your wealth, but true power lies in how we treat others. Now, you need to decide how you want to move forward." Grant sat down slowly, running his hands over his face. He looked like a man who had lost his footing. The idea that Margaret was his mother shattered the entire narrative he had built for himself. Worse still, it meant Olivia was his half-sister. "Olivia," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "She can't know about this. She has the right to know," Margaret replied firmly. "But that's a conversation we'll have together. What's important now is for you to understand what this means and how you'll act moving forward." Grant remained silent for a long time. Finally, he raised his gaze to Margaret, his eyes now filled with the vulnerability he had never shown before. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. Margaret smiled gently. Start by apologizing, not just to me, but to everyone you've hurt with your arrogance. That's how you begin again. When Olivia returned that evening, she found Grant and Margaret sitting together, talking. There was something different in the way Grant looked at Margaret, a respect that hadn't been there before. The conversation that would follow would change all their lives, but at that moment, Margaret knew she had planted the seed of real change. And Grant, for the first time, saw himself not as the powerful man he thought he was, but as a son who still had much to learn.